When I look back now, I can trace the first cracks long before everything fell apart, but at the time I was too in love, too hopeful, and frankly too blind to see what was right in front of me. My name is Nolan, and for most of my 20s I believed I would marry my girlfriend, Rowan. We met in college, built a little world together, moved to the same city after graduation, and for a while life felt like it was finally sensing up the way I had always imagined. I had a stable job at a tech company, she was working at a design studio. We had a cozy apartment filled with thrifted furniture and mismatched mugs that we collected during random weekend trips. Friends used to joke that we looked like a Pinterest couple, and I guess that made us feel even more secure, like the universe had stamped an approval sign on us. But the universe wasn't paying attention, and neither was I. The first thing that should have warned me was how distant she became whenever her coworker, a guy named Flynn, was mentioned. She'd always brush it off, saying they were simply working on the same project, late nights were normal, the industry was demanding, all that stuff. I wanted to trust her, and for a while, I managed to convince myself I had no reason not to. But then the small things started piling up, and small things have a way of gathering weight until they feel like boulders. She stopped leaving her phone on the coffee table. She changed her phone password. She suddenly became obsessed with going to the gym, which wasn't unusual in itself, except she never invited me to go with her anymore, even though we used to love doing that together. One night she came home late, really late, and she smelled like cologne I didn't recognize. She brushed past me, said she was exhausted, went straight to the shower. I stood in the hallway trying to talk myself out of thinking the worst. I kept telling myself I was insecure, paranoid, overthinking. People who love each other don't just assume betrayal, but people who love each other also don't act like strangers in the same room. It all came crashing down during a weekend when she said she needed to visit her parents. Something in her tone felt rehearsed, but I tried to let it go. I wasn't suspicious enough to snoop, at least not until my friend Gavin accidentally sent me a screenshot meant for his girlfriend. It showed Rowan at a restaurant that wasn't anywhere near her parents' house, sitting across from Flynn, leaning in too close, looking like someone who wasn't away visiting family. My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might actually pass out. I didn't confront her right away, though. I needed more than a picture. So while she was gone, I checked her old tablet that she used to use for work, thinking maybe her accounts were still connected. And that's when everything unraveled in the most excruciating way. Dozens of messages. Late-night conversations, photos, plans, secret jokes, and worst of all, timestamps that lined up perfectly with all the nights she had come home acting exhausted, overwhelmed, distant. I sat on the couch scrolling through every horrible detail until my hands wouldn't stop shaking. My world wasn't just cracking, it was dissolving under my feet. When she came back 2 days later, I didn't even give her a chance to lie. I told her what I knew, and instead of apologizing, instead of showing even a shred of remorse, she started crying about how stressed she had been, how complicated everything was, how she didn't want to lose me but also didn't want to end things with him. Something inside me snapped. Hearing her try to keep both of us like we were pieces on a board she could rearrange at will made something harden inside me that never softened again. I packed my things, stayed at Gavin's place for a couple weeks, and tried to process the fact that the woman I thought I'd spend my life with had turned me into a backup plan. The breakup was messy, humiliating, and painful in ways I still have trouble explaining. For a while I avoided everything that reminded me of her, including people she knew, which is why meeting her cousin, Marin, months later felt like fate playing some weird joke I didn't understand yet. We bumped into each other at a mutual friend's barbecue. I recognized her from old holiday photos but had never actually spoken to her beyond a quick hello years before. She apologized for Rowan on the spot, something nobody else in her family ever did. She said she didn't approve of the cheating, didn't approve of the secrecy, didn't approve of the way Rowan tried to play the victim afterward. I remember thinking she was refreshingly honest in a world where everyone seemed too scared to say the truth out loud. I didn't know then how much more complicated things would become, or that one day people online would argue about whether I made the worst mistake of my life or the best decision I could have possibly made. Because if someone had told me back then that I would eventually marry her cousin, I would have laughed, walked away, and assumed they were out of their mind. But life doesn't care about what seems logical, and the twists that followed turned everything I thought I knew inside out. If there's one thing I learned after the breakup with Rowan, it's that moving on isn't a single moment but a slow, grinding process where you have to rebuild yourself piece by piece. For months after everything fell apart, I felt like a ghost drifting through my own routine, doing the bare minimum at work, pretending I was fine around friends, forcing myself to eat even when the knot in my stomach refused to loosen. I didn't trust anyone's intentions, including my own. So when I ran into her cousin Marin again a few weeks after that barbecue, I didn't expect anything to come of it. She was picking up coffee from a shop near my workplace, and she recognized me instantly, offering a warm smile that I hadn't realized I desperately needed. She asked how I was holding up, and unlike everyone else who tiptoed around the subject, she didn't treat me like I was fragile or broken. She talked to me like someone who had survived something unfair and deserved to be acknowledged. We ended up sitting outside for almost an hour, talking about everything except Rowan, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of normalcy. But even then, I figured that would be the end of it. She was Rowan's cousin. It was already messy enough. Except things didn't end there. She texted me a couple days later, not in a flirty way, just checking in, and strangely, I didn't feel my usual suspicion. That surprised me more than anything. Over the next month we saw each other casually, mostly by accident at first, and then gradually by intention. She'd invite me to grab lunch. I'd invite her to a weekend market. It was innocent, slow, careful, and most importantly, nothing like the relationship I had just left behind. I found myself laughing again, something that felt foreign after everything with Rowan. I found myself telling her things I hadn't told anyone else about how betrayed I felt, how stupid I thought I was for not seeing the signs sooner, how angry I still was at myself. She didn't pity me. She didn't judge me. She just listened in that steady, grounded way that made even the messy parts of my past feel bearable. But as our connection grew, so did the tension surrounding it. At some point it stopped feeling like friendship and started feeling like something charged, fragile, and terrifying. We both knew it. We both felt it. And still, neither of us made a move because we were too aware of the shadow hanging over us. Rowan. The moment things shifted happened on a rainy evening when she came over to drop off a book she thought I'd like. She didn't plan to stay long, but the storm got worse, the power flickered, and we ended up sitting on the couch with candles lit, talking about how surreal life can be. She mentioned how their entire family had pretended nothing happened between Rowan and me, how they brushed it under the rug like it was just another one of Rowan's dramatic phases. The disappointment in Marin's voice was raw, and it hit me how deeply she resented the dysfunction her family had normalized. She said she admired me for walking away instead of letting Rowan play her games with me indefinitely. I don't know what shifted inside me at that moment. Maybe it was the sincerity in her eyes, maybe the softness in her voice, or maybe it was simply that for the first time in forever I felt understood, but something pulled us together. She leaned in slightly, like she was testing a boundary, and I didn't pull away. Our relationship didn't officially start that night, but something irreversible happened. We crossed an emotional line neither of us could uncross. After that, we tried to slow down, tried to give ourselves enough distance to think clearly, but every time we saw each other the tension grew thicker, harder to ignore. And then, about 3 months after the breakup with Rowan, her cousin kissed me. It wasn't planned, it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't some movie moment. It was quiet, honest, almost hesitant, like she was giving me every opportunity to stop her. But I didn't. I kissed her back. And once we crossed that final line, everything in my life reorganized itself around a truth I had avoided admitting. I wasn't just healing. I was falling for her. The problem was, the universe never lets something like that unfold quietly. Within days, someone from Rowan's family saw us together at a small gallery opening. They didn't confront us, didn't say a word to our faces, but by the next morning, chaos exploded. My phone lit up with messages from unknown numbers, from relatives I had never met, even from Rowan herself. She demanded answers, said I was trying to humiliate her, accused me of betraying her in the worst way possible, which was ironic considering everything she had done. She claimed I had ruined her reputation, ruined her relationships, ruined her sense of stability. She called me selfish. She called me disgusting. She called me obsessive for chasing her cousin to stay close to her, which couldn't have been further from the truth. And in the middle of all that noise, there was a single message from Marin: whatever happens, don't let them rewrite what really happened. We didn't talk for 2 days after that, not because we were ashamed, but because neither of us wanted to rush a response to a storm we didn't create. When we finally sat down to talk, we both agreed that whatever this was between us, it wasn't something temporary or reckless or rooted in bitterness. It was real. Scary, complicated, messy, but real. What we didn't expect was just how vicious Rowan would become once she realized she no longer had control over the narrative. She started showing up at places I frequented. She posted vague messages online implying I had manipulated her, claiming I pressured her during our relationship, twisting every detail to make herself look like the victim. And then, when none of that worked, she tried something even more unhinged. She asked me to meet her for closure, which was the beginning of one of the biggest plot twists of this entire story. One I couldn't have predicted even with all the warning signs. But the twist wasn't that she wanted closure. It was what she actually wanted from me. When Rowan asked to meet for closure, every instinct in my body screamed that it was a mistake. But part of me wanted to hear what she had to say, not because I owed her anything, but because I wanted the entire chapter closed for good. We met at a quiet cafe near the river, a place we used to visit when things were still good between us, though sitting across from her now felt like sitting with a stranger wearing a familiar face. She looked nervous in a polished way, like she had spent hours preparing for this conversation, rehearsing every angle. She started with the usual lines, saying she regretted how things ended, saying she didn't realize what she had until she lost it, saying she had been confused, overwhelmed, stressed, anything she could reach for that painted her in a sympathetic light. But the more she talked, the more I realized she wasn't there for closure at all. She was there for control. It became obvious when she shifted the blame, suggesting I should have tried harder to understand her, that I gave up on us too easily, even implying that my friendship with Marin after the breakup was a betrayal. I almost laughed at how absurd it was, but then she dropped the real bomb. She wanted to get back together. She said she had already ended things with Flynn, which I knew wasn't true because he had messaged me weeks before to apologize for the role he played, saying she had manipulated him too. She said she believed we could rebuild everything if we just let go of the past. And then, her voice lowered, almost pleading, she admitted she couldn't stand the thought of me being with someone else, especially someone in her own family. That was when everything clicked. This wasn't love. It wasn't regret. It was possessiveness. She didn't want me. She wanted the version of me she could control, the version who forgave her without asking questions, the version she could betray again when it suited her. When I told her calmly that I was done, that I had moved on, that I wasn't interested in trying again, her expression changed in an instant. All the fake vulnerability evaporated. What replaced it was anger laced with desperation. She warned me that dating her cousin would destroy everything, that her family would choose her, that I was making a mistake that would haunt me. She left the cafe without saying another word, and for a moment I thought that was the end of it. But when someone like Rowan loses control, they don't accept it, they escalate. That very night, she began sending messages to Marin, claiming I had begged her to take me back, claiming I had cried in the cafe, claiming I wasn't over her, doing everything she could to twist the situation before I had a chance to explain. Thankfully, Marin didn't fall for it. She had known Rowan far longer than I ever had, and she knew exactly what kind of games her cousin resorted to when she felt cornered. But even if we ignored the messages, the situation had stirred up something we couldn't avoid: the judgment and pressure from Marin's family. Overnight, people I had never interacted with began calling her dramatic, attention-seeking, selfish for choosing me. They accused her of breaking family unity, of embarrassing them, of being involved with someone tainted by the scandal Rowan had created. The worst part was that some of them blamed me for taking advantage of her, as if she didn't have a mind of her own. The entire family, with the exception of two distant cousins and an aunt who barely spoke to anyone, sided with Rowan. It was exactly the kind of toxic loyalty that made Rowan believe she could get away with anything in the first place. That pressure almost pushed Marin to walk away from everything. She told me she didn't want me to feel guilty for destroying her family relationships, and she didn't want to be the reason I kept getting dragged into their drama. But I refused to let her carry that weight alone. If loving someone means anything, it means standing with them when the world tries to shake them apart. And in a strange, backwards way, the more pushback we got, the closer we became. For once, both of us were choosing each other openly, decisively, and without fear. But Rowan wasn't done. The next twist came 2 months later, when she showed up at my apartment unannounced. I didn't even know how she found my new address. She looked exhausted, pale, frantic, holding a stack of papers and a small box, like she was about to deliver terrible news. When I refused to let her in, she tried to push past me, claiming it was urgent. I stepped outside, closed the door behind me, and told her she had 5 minutes. She said she was moving away, that she was leaving the state for a fresh start, and that before she did, she wanted to fix things between us. I stood there confused, wondering why she thought any of this mattered. Then she said something that froze every muscle in my body. "I'm pregnant." For a moment, everything stopped. She said the child might be mine, that she wasn't sure, that she needed me to step up and be responsible. I remember staring at her, unable to process the words because the timeline didn't even make sense. She had been with Flynn long after we broke up, and we hadn't been intimate in nearly 3 months before the breakup. She tried to insist, tried to convince me she just wanted honesty, but then she made the mistake of handing me the paperwork. None of it added up. The dates were inconsistent, the description of the father was vague, and worst of all for her, she accidentally left in a note from Flynn referring to the baby as our little chance to start fresh. She wasn't pregnant with my child. She wasn't confused. She was trying to trap me with the only leverage she thought she had left. I told her to leave before I called the police. She screamed that I would regret humiliating her again, that I was tearing the family apart, that Marin would never forgive me when she learned the truth. But the truth was already in my hands. After that night, every remaining tie between Rowan and my life snapped cleanly. She moved 2 months later, just like she said, but not before sending a long, bitter message to Marin accusing her of ruining everything. We blocked her everywhere, hoping that was finally the end. And honestly, for a long time, it was. The drama quieted. The messages stopped. The endless tension faded. And in that silence, something surprising and steady began to grow between me and Marin. Something that didn't feel like a replacement or a rebound but like a life we were choosing intentionally. What neither of us knew was that the biggest twist of all wasn't Rowan, or her lies, or her family. It was the way the future would unfold when everyone believed we wouldn't survive what we had just gone through. The time after Rowan disappeared from our lives felt unreal, almost like we were living in a quiet pocket of peace that didn't belong to us. For the first time in months, I wasn't constantly checking over my shoulder, waiting for another message, another accusation, another attempt to drag us back into her chaos. And in that quiet, something solid formed between me and Marin. Something quieter than passion and louder than comfort. Something that made me realize that every relationship I had before her had been a draft version of what real partnership could be. We weren't rushing. We weren't trying to prove anything to anyone. We were simply choosing each other day by day, letting our lives intertwine in ways that felt natural, inevitable even. She stayed over more often, eventually leaving a toothbrush, then a drawer, then half her wardrobe. Friends who had seen the disaster with Rowan were hesitant at first, but once they saw how differently I carried myself with Marin, how grounded she made me, how calm my life became, the skepticism faded. The only people who refused to accept us were her family, who had effectively exiled her by then. They didn't say it outright, they just stopped inviting her places, stopped texting, stopped reaching out entirely. But as painful as that was, she told me it felt like a relief. She wasn't losing a family. She was stepping away from a pattern that had damaged her long before I ever entered the picture. Still, even with the peace we found, part of me kept waiting for the next twist. Life had conditioned me to expect disaster the moment things felt stable. But months passed, then a year, then nearly 2, and Rowan remained nothing more than a fading memory. By the 2nd year of dating, I knew I wanted to marry Marin, but I was terrified that proposing would spark another round of family drama, another wave of accusations, another attempt by Rowan to claw her way back into relevance. Marin's response was simple. She didn't care. She said she would marry me anywhere, even in a courthouse, even in another state if needed, because building a life together mattered more than blood ties that had never supported her. So that's exactly what we did. I proposed during a quiet trip to the mountains, with no audience, no cameras, no family watching, just us, the cold air, and a future that suddenly felt like it was finally ours. She cried, I cried, and for the first time since meeting her, I felt something inside me settle in a way I didn't know was possible. The wedding was small, 20 people at most, and every single person there was someone who had been a real part of our lives, not just filler to satisfy expectations. We didn't send invitations to her family. She didn't want to, and I didn't argue. We figured they would hear about it eventually. We didn't expect how violently they would react when they did. The first sign of trouble came 3 days after the ceremony. Marin received a long email from a blocked address, written in a tone so dramatic it almost felt like parody. It accused her of betraying the family, of embarrassing them publicly, of choosing an outsider over her own blood. It went on to say that the entire family was deeply wounded and that she should reconsider the marriage before it permanently poisoned generational ties. There was no signature, but the phrasing was unmistakably Rowan's. It baffled us both. She had been silent for years. She had supposedly moved away. She shouldn't have even known about the wedding. The next twist came the following week, when a mutual acquaintance reached out to tell me that Rowan had recently moved back into town. Suddenly, the silence of the past years didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt like the calm before something inevitable. At first, we assumed she had moved back to be closer to her family, but then word got around that she had been asking questions about us. She reportedly told people she wanted closure or reconciliation or a chance to make things right, depending on who she spoke to. But we knew better. Rowan never returned without a motive. And as if on cue, her family, who had ignored us for years, suddenly started contacting Maren again. It began with concerned messages, asking why she hadn't invited them to the wedding, insisting they just wanted peace, saying they were trying to heal as a family. But the tone quickly turned when we didn't respond. One relative said Maren had shamed them by letting her wedding become a community spectacle. Another called me a manipulative outsider who had isolated her. Someone else claimed Rowan had been heartbroken and abandoned and that we should have considered her feelings. The gaslighting was almost impressive in its consistency. The situation took a darker turn when Rowan showed up at my workplace. She didn't try to come inside, security wouldn't have allowed it, but she waited outside, leaning against a car, staring at the entrance like she was rehearsing a confrontation. When I finally walked out and saw her, I felt something cold settle in my spine. She didn't look angry. She looked hopeful, eerily hopeful, like she believed this was her moment to reclaim the story. She approached me with a soft, trembling smile and said she never should have let me go. She said she returned because she realized I was the one who got away, that the time apart made her understand how deeply she loved me, that she wanted one chance to prove she had changed. She had no idea I was already married. When I told her, her face contorted into something unrecognizable, something sharp and wounded and furious all at once. She accused me of rushing the marriage to escape guilt. She said she should have been told. She said she deserved to know, as if my life were still somehow hers to supervise. And then she threw out the line that made everything click. How could you marry Maren? Of all people, how could you do that to me? The entitlement was staggering. I told her firmly that she needed to leave and stop contacting us. But she didn't back down. She doubled down. She said she wasn't giving up, that marriages end all the time, that I couldn't possibly be happy with someone who stole me from her. She said fate brought her back, that she wasn't going to let me throw her away again. That was the moment I realized she wasn't just delusional. She was escalating towards something dangerous. I changed my route home for the next week. I checked the locks twice every night. And even though I tried not to show it, Maren noticed the shift in me. We decided together that if Rowan continued to escalate, we would take legal action. But we didn't expect the next twist. The one that finally forced us to confront the truth about why Rowan had really come back and what she was planning. A truth that made everything we had gone through feel like a prelude to something far more disturbing. The truth about why Rowan had come back began to surface slowly, through a series of unsettling coincidences that no longer felt like coincidences once we connected the dots. It started when one of Maren's former coworkers mentioned she had seen Rowan at a lawyer's office, looking distressed and argumentative. At first we thought maybe it had something to do with her moving back or some legal trouble unrelated to us. But then another acquaintance said Rowan had been asking strange questions about our marriage, our living situation, even about whether I had ever talked about wanting children. It felt like she was gathering information, but we didn't understand the purpose until the real twist hit. Rowan had been telling people she and I were still in contact, that our marriage was fragile, that she believed she could win me back because we had unfinished business. When word reached us, we didn't know whether to laugh or be terrified. But fear won out the moment Maren received a message from an unknown number. It contained a screenshot of what looked like messages between me and Rowan, messages that I had never sent, claiming I missed her, regretted leaving, and felt pressured into marrying Maren. It only took a few minutes of digging to realize they were fabricated. She had created fake conversations, altering timestamps and copying my writing style from old messages she still had saved. It was desperate. It was manipulative. It was deranged. And it was enough evidence to bring to court if needed. We saved everything, but we hoped she would stop once she realized she couldn't get to us emotionally. Instead, she escalated again. The next twist came when a neighbor told us they had seen a woman standing outside our house late at night, staring at the windows. We checked the cameras. It was Rowan, watching the house for over 20 minutes before leaving. That was the moment we finally filed for a restraining order. Enough was enough. But even that didn't stop her. It only forced her to become more covert. She began spreading stories through family members claiming I had been unfaithful to Maren, trying to turn her extended relatives against her in some bizarre attempt to isolate her the same way she felt isolated after our breakup. What Rowan didn't understand was that we were past the point of being influenced by anyone's opinion, especially hers. The restraining order went through, and for a brief moment we thought it was finally over. Weeks passed with no sightings, no messages, no fabricated screenshots, no attempts to twist reality. It felt like we could finally breathe. But the worst twist, the final twist, came unexpectedly from someone who had no stake in the drama at all. Flynn. He reached out to me months later, apologetic and shaken. He told me Rowan had contacted him again, trying to rekindle whatever they once had, but when he refused, she broke down and confessed everything. Not just the cheating, not just the lies, not just the fabricated screenshots, something bigger, something deeper, something that put everything into a chilling new light. According to him, Rowan had never returned to our town just for closure. She had come back because she believed she had made a mistake letting me go. In her mind, our breakup had been temporary, something she expected me to reverse once I calmed down. When she found out I was serious about leaving, she spiraled. And when she later found out I was dating Maren, she became obsessed with the idea that I hadn't left her for good. I had simply replaced her with a version of her that was easier to control. That was her exact wording. A version of her. Flynn said she had become fixated on proving that I still loved her, convinced that everything I was doing with Maren was meant to make her jealous. She had been tracking my life through friends, social media, even old accounts she hadn't logged out of. She moved back because she believed she just needed one confrontation, one emotional breakdown, one moment to make me remember what we had. When that didn't work, her plan shifted from reconciliation to destruction. If she couldn't have me, she wanted to tear apart everything I had built since leaving her. She admitted to Flynn that she fabricated messages not for Maren's benefit but for mine. She had planned to send them to my workplace, hoping to destabilize my environment the same way she once destabilized our relationship. She admitted she had waited outside our house because she wanted to see how far gone I was. She admitted she hoped our marriage would collapse under pressure so she could step in afterward. The obsession, the entitlement, the delusion, it was deeper than anything we had imagined. When Flynn finished telling us everything, I remember sitting in stunned silence, realizing that the woman I had once planned to marry had never actually let me go. She hadn't moved on. She hadn't healed. She hadn't accepted the consequences of her own actions. She had rewritten the story in her head until she believed it completely. But the final closure came not from her destruction, but from our decision to finally remove her from our lives entirely. We strengthened the restraining order, notified her relatives to keep her away, documented every contact attempt, and made it clear that any future harassment would be immediately taken to court. And this time, for reasons we still don't fully understand, she disappeared. She moved again, cut ties with most of the people she once manipulated, and faded into the background like a storm finally losing its force. Life didn't snap back to normal immediately, but it grew steady again, stable, predictable, safe. Maren and I built a home without shadows hanging over us, without fear of twisted narratives or manufactured scandals. And slowly, the trauma became a story rather than a chapter we were still living. Looking back now, the irony isn't lost on me. Rowan thought our relationship ended because I wanted someone easier, softer, simpler. But the reality was that leaving her taught me what real love, real trust, real partnership looks like. It taught me that peace isn't boring and stability isn't weakness. And in the end, the biggest truth of all was the one she could never grasp. I didn't marry her cousin to spite her. I married her cousin because she was everything Rowan pretended to be and nothing she ever was: honest, steady, loyal, and capable of choosing love without trying to control it. My ex cheated and tried to get back together. She tried everything: lies, manipulation, fake messages, even obsession, but in the end, the only thing she succeeded in was pushing me toward the person I was meant to be with. And that's how I ended up married to her cousin.